Hello, everyone. David Morgan of morganreport.com. I have a special treat out, Peter Thomas, with me, and we're going to go through the early days of the Hunt brothers. And he was actually a floor trader that was running the orders back and forth in the good old days. I vetted Peter to the best of my ability. I talked to the trust manager for the Hunts, who I know personally. I've had dinner and lunch, breakfast with him a few times, and he verified that the main brokerage place that Peter worked at what is true. He didn't know Peter on a personal level, but that's sort of immaterial. So I did my best to vet you. And Peter, we are thrilled to get the real story, more or less from the horse's mouth, of what the heck was going on in the early days of the Hunt brothers and all the way through to, I guess, the glorious end where they're standing shoulder to shoulder in front of Congress swearing in.
Believe me, I remember when they came in and they went, oh, by the way, you can only sell. And I had 8,000 contracts in my order deck, and Myron Potter. This goes way back. Myron Potter was the margin clerk, and he just looked at me with this stare because he knew this thing was breaking $2, $3, $4, and then I was going to be scrubbing the floors in the pit. I was a goner, and thank God I got out of everything and ended up. I mean, I kind of went home and went, honey, and she went, yeah. I go, you know that really cool Mercedes I bought you? She goes, oh, I love that car. I go, you're gonna love the Toyota. It's a great car. So I do remember when the government made it, illegal to trade silver.
Yeah. Why don't you start kind of at the beginning? I've got your bio here, but I'd rather hear it from you. But
Sure.
how did you become one of the biggest silver traders in the world?
Well, it's funny. I didn't go to all the right schools. I didn't attend Harvard. I went to military school. I was learning how to do mortar attacks when you guys were trying to figure out how to do 3-point shots. It was different world for me. And my dad was on the floor for 40 years, and he was an airborne ranger, wounded behind enemy lines. He was a heck of a guy. And so when I was 11, let's say, he would take my first baseman's mitt when I was ready to go out, and he'd set it on top of the refrigerator. And he'd bring out charting paper and he'd lay it along the top of the dryer because it had the two edges that came up, tape it down, give me the daily movement of the silver or gold, usually gold, and some mechanical pencils. And from the time I was 11 to the time I was 13, I was charting. And I had no idea what he was doing. It was just I had to do it before I could go play baseball. And then after a while, I would look at the charts. I go, "Hey, Dad, did that open higher that day?" And he go, "Now you're getting it." It's pretty good. And what was funny was when I was 13, right? He comes in, cracks me on the foot, right? It was a tough old guy. He goes, "What are you doing?" I go, "It's my birthday. I'm sleeping, Dad. What am I doing? I'm 13." He goes, "You're 13. It's time to get a job. What are you doing laying around for?" I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, let's go. You're going to the exchange." And I was like, "Uh-oh. Get dressed." He says, no, no. He says, "No outdoor clothes. Put on good clothes." I was like, "Okay." And so I started, doing various things. I was actually a gopher for a while too. I'd run down and, back in the day, you could smoke on the floor. I'd go get guys cigarettes, and just do stuff that needed. And then eventually they made me a runner, and I eventually worked up to become a phone clerk. And it was I was just groomed from day one, and never stopped. I mean, honestly, I was finishing undergraduate school in medicine. I wanted to be a doctor in a very big way. And I was waiting on what was referred to as your berth. And, you're like in a ship, you get a berth. And so I was finishing the undergrad, and I was working at a hospital at the time. I was doing rotation. And a phone rings, and it's my dad. And he says, "You're waiting on your berth, I know." He says, pack all your stuff and come back to Chicago. I said, excuse me, well, what do you mean? I got an apartment, a job, I'm waiting up coming to die. He says, doesn't matter. He says, a very famous silver trader, Irish guy, tall Tommy. He was just a tremendous guy. And he had done a favor for my dad years ago. And my dad said to me, he goes, we owe Tommy one. And I knew Tommy because I'd taken orders into him. And he said, we owe him one. And he says, hey, one of his back order guys went down. He says, we think he had a heart attack. He's in the hospital. We need somebody to fill the red months. Now, for people who don't know, and I know you do, Dave, but the stuff a year out or more is referred to as the reds, and generally there's not a lot of volume in it. And so I figured, fill the reds. I said, well, what am I? He says, he's going to buy you a seat. Excuse me? Because he's going to pick you up a ticket. I'm like, I'm coming. I got everything back. Back then, the doctor was making $50,000 a year. I mean,
Let me pause you there, because people that don't know wouldn't know what that meant and how much it cost to have a seat, what that would mean. I mean, the red months are important for them to know.
Yeah.
But getting paid a seat means a lot. So explain that.
Well, it's like being a made man. It's like you're in the club. You get your badge, you get your ticket, you pay for your seat, and it was a lot of money back then. But he was going to sponsor me to my seat, and I knew everybody at the time. The president of the exchange looked at me and he goes, he came down to see me because he'd been seeing me since I was like 12 years old, right? All of a sudden, I'm finishing school, he comes out and he goes, and he always called sons or daughters of traders, if they were coming on the floor, as number two. And he goes, hey, number two. He goes, congratulations. He goes, oh, by the way, you passed your exam, you remember? I went, oh, okay, that sounds good. I'd only been there my whole life. He goes, you're in. And so I got my badge around here somewhere. I should have brought it in for you just for the show. But I went back to Red December, which did a whopping 700 volume, which was like nothing, and started filling orders. And then it turns out I was pretty darn good at it, So next thing I know, they started giving me spreads, which I was really good at. And so I was doing some pretty complex spreads at the time that I just had a good head for the numbers. And I was off and running, and I didn't become a doctor. I'm sorry, folks. I didn't get there, but I did all right on the floor. So it was okay.
Excellent. So how did you get connected to Mr. Bunker Hunt?
It's an interesting story. I'm glad you asked that. I'm standing on the floor, and an order comes in, and it's a spread. It's a big spread. I mean, a lot of numbers on it, and it's inverted. It was wrong for like 18 cents wrong. I mean, big number. I'm like, whoa. And the guy who took the order's name was Tim, and he was waiting to become a catcher for the Chicago Cubs. But just loved the Irish kid with freckles and great athlete, and loved him to pieces. Everybody loved him. And I looked at Tim and I gave him a chop sign. I said, and I came out of the pit. I said, what? I said, Timmy, you got this inverted. He goes, no, I took it the way he gave it to me. I said, get the customer on the phone. So the customer picks up this heavy southern, that drawl kind of thing. What's up? I go, I don't know you, sir. Look, I'm the filling broker in the back, and this order is inverted. And I go, look, I'm either going to make a lot of friends today, or why don't we fix this? And he said, well, what do you recommend? I said, change this order over to a DRT. And he goes, what's that? I go, that means you're leaving it to the broker's discretion. I go, you have way too many contracts in here. You're going to blow this market apart. They're going to get killed getting filled. I go, let me do them 10, 20 at a time over the day. I mean, it's like, 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. I go, by this afternoon, I'll have most of them filled for you, and you get filled closer to the board. He says, done. So I took it out as a DRT. By the end of the day, I had it filled. And No contracts were ever signed. Nothing was done. It was just any back month spreads or any bigger orders for the back, they had to run or bring them to me. And I really didn't know the family that well, but I knew the numbers they were doing. And I knew the account numbers that were on it. So, I knew I was pretty good with it. And I would just fill them. And we were at maybe $5.80 an ounce then, and we ran all the way to $55 in the back. So that was a hell of a ride.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So just continue on. I just want to hear the whole story. So when did you find out that that was Hunt? You heard the Southern accent. Did you have any suspicion it was him? I mean,
Well,
somewhere along the line, they had, to my understanding, reading the Silver Bulls. And I've only been to exchange and on the floor a couple times. I'll take the mic for a minute. But
yeah.
when they came in to Chicago the second time, and Rick Santilli's out there smoking.
Okay.
And
Of
I
course.
walk up to him and I say, "Hey, Rick," and he's like, "Well, who are you?" I said, "I'm David Morgan." And I told him what I did. But
Yeah.
I'm a newsletter writer and interested in gold and silver. He was just so friendly and so nice to me.
That's nice.
He
Yeah.
said, I don't know. I don't think gold's really going to have a big run this time. There's so many other investments and all this stuff.
Yeah. Right.
And I listened to him. I mean, I'm open minded. So he finished his cigarette. We probably spoke for 5-10 minutes at the most, and he leaves. I leave. We walk in. I go up to. I actually had two brokers. Went out and saw Nell, and I forget the main broker she worked for, but he was a Cubs fan, and he had more memorabilia. He probably had $3 million worth of memorabilia in his office between
Right.
jerseys, baseballs, baseball bats, gloves, autographs. I mean, it was insane. So I got to meet him. And then I
Yeah.
got back down to the floor with Nell with my little pass, pretty big badges, at least in those days. And
Right.
I walk out on the floor, and there's Rick Santilli about 10 feet away. And he walks over to me, he looks at Nell and says, "Let me take him around." And Nell,
Oh, wow.
"Is there anybody you don't know?" And I only met him like a half an hour before out on the street.
Yeah.
But here I have the privilege and the honor of being escorted around all the pits with Rick
Right.
himself.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
go through all the pits, more or less all. And then he goes, "Watch this." Well, the bond pit, even way back then, was pretty sparse because most of the
Yeah, it
stuff
was.
was
It
off
really was.
floor
Yeah.
trading. There weren't
Right.
that many guys
Well,
screaming at each other anymore. So he
yeah.
says, "Watch what I'm going to do." And I'm, okay, of course. I'm just learning. I'm just so excited just to be there,
Sure.
let alone have
Yeah.
Rick Santilli show me around. And so he got all the guys to crowd together, and then the camera guys got like got an angle that it made it look really full and really frenzied and like a pit
Yeah.
would normally look in the older days.
Yeah.
And he got in front with his mic and he talked about the bond market that day. But I'll never forget that. But
Yeah.
my broker's she just lost it. She's like,
Yeah.
"What?" You know,
Yeah. That's,
and it
yeah.
was just one of those random things. That,
But it's a pretty tough bunch down there. I mean, bottom line is, it's 300 guys standing in a circle, and all of them got families and mortgages and kids, and you name it. And somebody throws a piece of meat in there about every 30 seconds, and it's a Donnybrook all day long, and it could get pretty rough in there at times. But I'm glad you had a good experience. I'm glad you were treated with respect.
well, I think because Rick was standing next to me had a lot to do with it, but it was really, really fun. And, I mean, I don't know what else to say, but let's get it back to you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how you actually found out it was Bunker Hunt and move on from there.
Well, I really didn't know. Here was the thing, we knew there were two guys that were neck and neck, Khashoggi and the Hunts, as far as the wealthiest guy in the world, and the numbers would go up and down, and that was the big race. And to me, it's just sort of like, I mean, it's not Uncle Hunt, it's Boss Hunt, and he's putting orders in, and I make damn good sure I'm getting them filled right. And I mean, occasionally he would come down to see the guys, not often, and one day, I never told this story. But somehow somebody found out. But one day I was down there, I was filling some orders, and I had a Seiko watch on, one of the first computer watches that came out, right? And one of the hunts was on the floor. He came down on the floor, and he looked up, and they waved me over, and I go, "What's up?" I mean, we got orders that something get messed. I figured I made a mistake, and so I'm kind of nervous. It's just like I'm not talking to some mope on the corner here. And he goes, "What's that on your wrist?" I go, "That's the new Seiko that's out." He says, "Son, nobody works for me and wears a Seiko." He goes, and he reaches over and he hands me this Rolex, and he slaps it on my wrist and he says, "That's a Texas Timex." He says, "And nobody that works for me doesn't wear one of those." He says, "And I don't expect you to see you without it." And I was like, oh. And I'll tell you something, about every 6 months or a year, some Rolex collector will reach out to me somehow and go, "You want to sell that watch?" And I'm like, "No way." So he was a character. I mean, he kind of, had his own way of being who he was, and he wasn't showy or anything, but he had a certain flair. Let's put it that way.
So he was also taking delivery in those days as well as
Oh,
in the futures market. So let's talk about that a little bit.
oh,
Kind
that
of give
was
us a feel for how
well.
that process went. Was it hard in the early days? Was it
It
easy
was
or less
well. Here's the
hassle?
thing: nobody took delivery. It was just like nobody even knew how to do it, and so um, somebody asked me. They go, "Pete, you're the reader here. Read this up. See, we got to take some delivery of some silver." I said, "Okay." So I sat there, I read it, so I ended up calling the head of HSBC's banking system. And I said, "Hey, we're going to be taking some deliveries. Who do I talk to?" And they were kind enough to introduce me around. I got to know some of the vaulting people. And um, so we started taking delivery and then moving them to private holdings areas. But we would always keep the certificates. And so he had the money in his account if he was trading, collateralized by the silver. Very smart. He's the only guy that ever really did that. He was like, "Hey, I own the silver, but by the way, here's the certificate. If you want it, call it away, and I'll redeliver it." And we started doing that we started picking up some big spreads in there. I mean, 80, 90 cents sometimes on a delivery. That's a heck of a lot of money. And I know you were wondering how I ended up being a race car driver, because I was playing rugby and I was doing Muay Thai kickboxing, and I always wanted to race. I've always been a car guy. And I went in for one of his deliveries. They called me and they went, "The certificate doesn't match the bars," which means it might as well be a slab of mud. It's worthless. If it isn't assayed 99.99% silver, it's not. And the bar number has to match the certificate number. So I'm going, "This ain't working. You're two numbers off here. We're not taking this bar. Find the bar or not." And they said, "No." So I went down to the vault, and I go down to the vault, and I said, "Look, let's just find it. You just put it in the wrong rack." Don't. And as I'm looking at the racks, the bottom of each rack has a 5,000-ounce silver ingot on it to support it, right? And all the way around, every one of them. And I'm looking and I'm going, "So what the hell are those?" I go, "Somebody spilled some steroids on the ground?" I go, "I've never seen a bar those big, And she says, "Oh no, they quit trading those." She says, we don't even know what the hell to do with them. Nobody would take them." And I said, "I can see why. How the hell do you move them? You got to move them with the come along there. They're huge." She said, "Yeah, we got them all the way down and taking the boats forever." And I said, "What do you want for them?" And she said, "I don't know. We just want to get the hell out of here. We'll tell you." She said, "Let me see what our cost was." She gives me her cost. I go, "Okay, I'll take them for cost." She goes, "What?" I said, "I'll take all of them, every one for cost. load them on my truck. I'll have it out back at the Board of Trade. And she goes, let me call the guys. So she called. They said, yeah, they want him out of here. My buddy, Stephen Flaxman Jewelry and Flatware, used to make silverware, I said, Stephen, what do you get? When's your next pour? And he says, next week. He says, I'm taking silver. And I said, how about I deliver at spot with no delivery charge, pick them up at the Board of Trade? He goes, deal. How much? He says, I don't care how much. I'll take all you got. So he rolled all these out of there, loaded him in the back of this pickup truck he had. We were dropping him in there for a while. And I ended up owning a race car team after that. It worked out pretty well, So that was my delivery experience. It was like, yeah, I like this, But we used to, once we got the hang of it, we had this really great gal in the back, and she would keep track of who had what and when deliveries were due and when they were not. And then if I knew of some stuff that was coming in or going out, I would inform her, and then she would coordinate it, and they would have like these pink delivery slips, and they would come out and issue them. And we at the time, I guess my second year, they said I was the largest taker and maker of silver in the industry, non-bank taker and maker of silver in the industry. And I just had no idea. I mean, I was just doing my job,
Well, these days, a lot of the refiners go direct ship to a supplier, or they even make it, with mesh and wire and shot and all the
Absolutely.
different forms for industry. But in those days, didn't most of it go either to a bank or the exchange, or am I wrong in my thinking way
No,
back?
you're exactly right. Very little of it was coming exchanged to the guys. I mean, for example, if I get an order from one of our wholesalers for silver shot, we'll do it in 5,000 pound lots, and I order that, and that comes exception because the military owns the runways there, and we go through all the steps, and then we deliver the shot to them. But back then, I mean, even the wire manufacturers were buying from somebody that was spooling and really wasn't taking delivery. They were buying it on the street, and it wasn't until really almost 10 years after that we saw guys finally going, I'm going to take it from the LME, or I'm going to take it from New York or Chicago at that time, because because the brokerage houses just didn't know how to do it, Dave. That was really the problem. They weren't, yeah, hey, I want to take some delivery from the exchange. And they'd be like, not through us, we have no idea how to do it. Find somebody. And it was more a lack of schooling than anything else. And so we didn't see it happen. That's why I probably ended up being one of the guys, because everybody knew they could go to me and it would be handled properly.
So now you've been in for quite some time. Talk about the last rush. I mean, one thing I've talked about on some of my interviews is, the acceleration phase of any market. You get into that panic manic phase. And
Yeah.
I had a couple contracts. I was just a youngster. I probably a little older than you, but I started in the futures market just as a retail investor.
Gotcha.
Guy was my third broker. He was really good. He taught me not, and at the time it finished places, the whites lead the yellow. He retired young. He was like mid-30s because he liked to write
Wow.
like operas or something, but he was a great broker. And so I had a few contracts on for December of
Okay.
1979 and rolled them into January. Gold peaked on my
Nice.
birthday. So,
That January month was a tough month too. It was like, sometimes it had volume, sometimes it didn't. It was weird.
so tell me what it was like going from, let's say, to January 79 to January 1980. Because in
Well,
January 79, we're sitting at $6 spot,
yeah,
thereabouts. It was an
right.
all-time high, but it kind of worked the way up there. and I'm getting my master's degree in finance.
Okay.
And I had an interview with the one of the bigger name professors, and she was the first one to call me a silver expert.
Oh, wow.
And talking to her about my thoughts on honest money, precious metals, all this stuff.
Sure.
And she started looking at the silver market. And of course, once it went past 15,
Oh,
everybody that watched the markets were panicking. My God, this,
oh yeah.
$5 metals at 15 for crying out loud.
Oh yeah.
But they got to the
And you
hurry.
know
So
what? I'll share something.
I want to hear it.
At 16, there was a gazillion guys that were short. And that's what made us hit 20. Because these guys, oh, there's no way it can go this much higher. And as a broker, I don't know where a market's going to go. Market's going to go wherever it wants to go. My job is to execute. If I got more, when I come in the morning, a lot of people don't know this, but you would have your assistants would come in and they'd stack your decks. You'd have your buys, your sells, then they put your spreads in the middle, which you would tuck in your belt, and then you'd have your buy and your sells in your pockets, either up here or down here. And that's how I traded. I learned from the best, and the best always told me, never have an opinion about a market. If you have an opinion, you're going to lose money that day. Doesn't matter how smart you think you are, because you can't outrace your order deck. And that's a fact, Dave. That's just the market goes where it wants to go. It's more buyers or more sellers that day, and there's no in between, And the news is going to affect how they react, but it's not going to affect the overall move. And all the guys that were like, it'll never get through 16, they buried him, absolutely buried, and that's why we saw that. And I'm sure, that spurt we had all of a sudden, because I remember it went limit up and we were all sitting on the floor, on the steps, right? Waiting for an order to come in. Somebody's got to sell, right? When a market is lock limit up, that's what it is. Doesn't trade. It's bid up, can't do it, can't go any higher. And everybody's sitting around having a waiting for an order to come in. And it stayed that way for 3 days. Lock limit up. And I mean, it was ugly if you were short. But yeah, I remember it pretty well. That was a wild run,
So there's a story out of Forbes. I forget the gentleman's name, but he traded futures for a living and he was doing okay, but he had like an off year. He basically took, from the story I remember, took like a year off. And he studied all the markets, he looked at all his bad trades and came back here and he decided to trade silver. And what he did was what I call the middle. I don't know what you guys call it because, I'm not rubbing shoulders. I've only been on the floor a few times, but he waited for the momentum and he traded like from 15 to 30, which is probably, I don't know, a week or two. But he caught that $15 move.
Yeah.
And he told his wife, we're out. She's, oats we're out of, silver we're out of, gold we're out of, wheat, whatever.
Whatever, sure.
Out. We're done. I made a large enough trade where we are free.
Yeah.
I thought that, always liked that story because I'm not a get rich quick guy. I never have been. I had, times when I was trading where, the Lexus is in the driveway and then, you got to turn it into a Ford Falcon. And
you're not supposed to tell that story.
So,
we're all winners. Oh my God. They carried me out on my shield a few days. Believe me, buddy.
But so I just wanted to throw that out there. I always love telling that story. But let's just get into the end days of 15 to 30 to 35 to the rules change and
yes.
Everybody's sitting there and now what do you do? This has never happened before. What do you tell your clients? What are your customers doing? They want to buy silver. They can't. They got to sell.
Yeah.
So go through that for me.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. I was, I had put an ERISA hat on too. I'd gotten trained and I was doing some pension funds and moving some metals into that too, So what happened was, because I knew a lot of people at the time, you know. I was going to a lot of bigger pensions that I had large amounts. Someone said, I don't know where the hell this thing's going, but they're not letting us trade it. Basically, you guys want to consider taking some profit. I mean, you're up 200%. It might not be a bad idea, you know. So I had a lot of guys in IRAs, in and all kinds of different vehicles that would say, okay, Pete, you know, take it, you know. And so I was still able to get silver to people, but nowhere near could we meet the demand. The demand was monstrous. And, you know, I had, I basically, when we hit the top and then it started crashing, the orders were getting filled and this and that. And it was just insanity. Honestly, Dave, I burned out. I was totally burned out. I'd gone through the whole run, you know, and, you know, it was, you know, and back then, you know, my nickname was Clean. You know, I nothing up my nose but my finger. I didn't drink. I was, you know, I really regimented on my diet. The bell would ring. I'd either go to my rugby club or I'd go to the dojo or I'd lift iron. And then on the weekends, if there was a race, I would race. But I always worked out. I always stayed in good shape. I never, you know, and never, but my brain was gone. I mean, my dad looked at me and he goes, you look like a freaking zombie. He goes, get out of here, you know? So I sold a lot of my stuff. And at that time, at the peak, you know, right after the peak, really, it was the first real difficult break. And then I just said, I can't do this. I can't do it. And so I bought a BMW with a sidecar on it and spent the year riding around in Europe, going to museums. And I got on the A list for some parties and went to a lot of good restaurants. And you know, I came back and I could think, you know, I was toast, you know, and I came back and that's when I started World Trading Group. And it was the first IB that was listed. And we did pretty well, you know, we did pretty well. And then I ended up selling it to a group and they ran it into the ground in 6 months.
When you say IB, that's International Broker.
Yeah, and this was like, you know, independent broker. And they just trading so easy. I mean, you just buy it, sell it, and then oh, this is easy. I go, yeah. Yeah, these guys on the floor, this is white sharks. They play for keeps. When they take a bite, it hurts, pal, you know. And they said, you know, I gave them a number and I sold it and I walked away from that. And Barry Lynn came to me and he said, I'm creating a wholesale or a retail discount operation. It's never been done before. I want you to run it. And I Barry and I always got along, and Manny Green was his number two. Manny Green's famous in the industry and a real head for mathematics. And yeah, hey kid, come on in, we need you. You know, it was like an old Italian mobster, you know, that voice, you know. And I said, all right, Manny, what's the deal? And so I ended up doing the first discount house with Barry, and we did real well with it. It was a lot of fun, but that's kind of what, you know, I just kind of walked away and, you know, came back, started another company and did well with it, sold that, took a little break there and spent some time in the Middle East. And I still, as you know, I have like 21 million viewers in the Middle East now. I do Abu Dhabi, Dubai, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Only one I'm not in is Turkey because I haven't been granted a license yet for them. But I do 5 nations there, and they like me, and so I've always had good friends there. So that's pretty much my bigger pull is in the Middle East right now.
Did you exit before Silver Thursday in March of '80, or were you there for that?
I I lost a lot of money. I lost a lot of money. I mean, I was literally saying to myself, "Am I going to lose my home?" You know, it was the break. I mean, people don't understand how to. When in the old days, when a man stood up or a woman, we had women on the floor then, you know, and you make a bid, you stand behind it. It's you. There's no in between, and if you're not filling, if it's not the house paper, it's your paper, and it can be pretty darn scary. And I thought I was done, and fortunately I was able to trade my way out. But yeah, I remember too well, as a matter of fact. And it's a real fear. I mean, it's like incoming fire, man. I mean, you can't describe it unless you've been there. And you see your life pass in front of your eyes, and next thing silver's broken $1. And you're like, what the hell just happened? It was terrifying. Yeah, I was there. I was there. I wish I wasn't,
Yeah. Well, I traded only gold up until my birthday, which is January 21st. Not that anybody needs to know. And I got fascinated with silver outperforming, even though I'd looked at it. So I started, moving in the silver market.
Yeah.
And after the big push down, I thought, 1450 looked pretty good. Don't ask me why. It probably looked good on the chart for a week or two.
I'm sure you had your reasons, right?
I had a reason for it, that. And then, of course, Silver Thursday went down to what, 10, 20? I forget, 10 something, if I remember.
Oh, and it was just, there was blood everywhere.
I was conservative. I'd been beaten enough to learn enough to know.
Yeah.
I know. In fact, I started using a Safra Bank. Do you remember them?
No, I did. I never traded with them.
They were in LA. It was
Okay.
an LA thing, I think. I
Yeah.
think they had a couple of banks, and what you could do is you could buy physical places and let you leverage it like 3-1. Depending on your credit score, I think you could go to 5-1.
Wow.
So after I think it was after Silver Thursday, I just cashed out my mutual funds and I paid for the whole ticket and came in to get my silver. And so, they took a security guy, a couple of them really, and, got the executive parking spot and opened up the trunk of my Firebird or whatever it was at the time. And started throwing these bars in the back. Well, they're coming out with the hand carts. The secretary says, I've never seen silver before. Wait a minute. This bank specializes in silver trading. I'm the only guy that ever took physical. It's like on exchange.
Goes right.
Want delivery? What are you talking about? We don't know how to do that. Right?
To my point, right? I mean, these guys. Oh man, yeah. I mean, I remember Burt Reynolds. Burt Reynolds was a great guy, man. I mean, I did 20 movies, and he was a hell of a stuntman too. But yeah, I mean, you didn't have much room in that trunk. That's for sure.
The whole car was like the dropped about a foot.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Yeah.
So,
did you have the T-tops on it? I remember that.
I didn't have that version.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so I want to go to modern times and what you let's find out what you think about the metals in today's era. I mean, I'm kind of old school and I've always been a believer in honest money, sound money. And this is sort of passe. I mean, it's
right.
Gray hairs now, and it's like doesn't matter. You can create it out of nothing, and who gives a damn? And deficits don't matter, and Reagan proved that, and all this shit that we hear on the markets. And yet, there's a subset going on that's what I consider to be the next phase of the monetary system, which has to do with this blockchain thing. And some of us are kind of enthralled with that and putting metal on the blockchain, which I'm involved with. And I think that's actually the next step up, because if you go back and study money like I have, and I'm sure you know all this, Peter, but the problem with the goldsmiths was they took your money, your gold in, and they gave you a certificate. The certificate was paid, and they said, wait a minute, no one wants delivery. I know what to do. I'll make up some more certificates. The blockchain gets around that because it's an immutable ledger and everybody's got their eyes on it. So you eliminate that problem, at least in theory. So what are your thoughts going forward on this?
Well, I mean, let's bifurcate this. First off, at AU Secure, which is where I hold the chairman's seat and I'm on the board there. And I told him we were going to be one of the first metals dealers that everything went on the blockchain. I didn't care. I want everybody that trades with us to be able to see where the hell their metal is. And I said, if you have a problem with that, I'm going out the door. And they went, oh, no, we're set up to roll. Everything goes on the blockchain. I said, okay, cool, fine. My biggest problem, Dave, right now, and I don't know if you've covered it in your shows or not, is this crypto gold. You could trade this, and we got the gold in the bank, and don't worry. And I'm like, really? I'm going to take your word for it that my metal's there? No, I want a certificate. I want to know it's there. I want to know when it was poured, which we refer to as the date of birth. When did it come from? I get nervous about this so-called posted gold. So it's a two-sided thing. I like the fact that I'm on the blockchain for my customers. I could see everything that comes through our firm. I know it. As far as this guy going, don't worry, it's in there. We issued the credit to your card. It's right there. The gold is there. I go, really? I used to be called, I am a federal mandate for the court system. Occasionally they'll call me in on a case, and I will testify in front of the judge and give them an opinion as to the value of certain things made out of metals for settlement cases. And it's get a little involved, but I actually kind of enjoy it. So, how often do these individuals have full-scale audits of their vaults? And I never see that posted when I see these people offering me these crypto gold cards or whatever. So I have a hard time with that, Dave. I think that's kind of my biggest problem on the gold side, because I think that's the side that can really tarnish our reputations more than anything else. And but I would say that really we've seen the survivors, if you will, really do have a lot of integrity. I rarely hear about someone not getting a delivery, and when they do, usually it's a mistake. I haven't seen anybody walking off with any large amounts of metal. So far, so good on the physical side, but on the imaginary side, I get nervous,
Well, still, there's been a couple of cases. UBS was one, Morgan Stanley was another. Back in, I think it was 2010, Morgan Stanley was selling silver to clients. And, I guess one of their whales said, this doesn't smell good, or they won't let me see my metal. And he got suspicion. And he got his lawyer involved, and they found out not only did Morgan Stanley never buy any silver, they didn't even have a vault. And they were charging the whole time. And then the discovery process.
Right. I remember that they were charging vault. They were charging for vault rental.
Yeah.
That's where they got nailed. Yeah.
And so the discovery process, one of the guys, they didn't give his name. It might be in the record. I don't have the court record.
Yeah.
He said, well, it was standard procedure in the industry to work this way. And boy, if that doesn't scare you, I don't know what does. Now, that's just one man talking out his, what. But still, that's what's in the discovery. So,
yeah,
of course, UBS did it too. And then there was this depository, I forget the name of it, that has, I don't know the number, but probably something about 70-80% of the metal they purportedly held, because they were leasing some out and doing illegal things.
The lease thing. Yeah, right. Yeah.
And so, it irks me, because the whole idea for me about precious metals is it's, honest.
Yeah.
An ounce of gold's the same anywhere in the universe if it's pure. And you get scams around everything. Let's face it. I mean, you get scams in real estate, you get scams in stocks, you get scams in penny stocks, you get scams in limited partnerships. I mean, no one's exempt. Currency trading, you name it. Gold is no exception. There's scams.
Yeah.
But I would think there'd be less because of its integrity of the metal itself. But no, I think it's probably just as, apt to be scammed. In fact, maybe even more, because, when times get hard, especially as people get older, you get these phone rooms calling people up and telling them about, what's going on in the economy. And then they got to own gold, but they don't want gold. They want this rare coin gold that's, worth a bazillion
unfortunately.
All that stuff. So what's your overall take? Am I off base here? Or do you think there's about an equal amount of crap going on in the precious metals as there is any other financial industry?
Well, here's what I do, and you see what you bear me out. I always tell people, if you're buying gold from somebody that hasn't been here for half a decade or a decade, why? It's so difficult to stay in business and meet regulations and do everything. And you could look up, past statements from clients that have traded with them and whatnot. Never trade with a new guy. I mean, just don't. I mean, it's so difficult to run a clean shop and make all your deliveries on time and whatnot. And the other thing is that I knew Bob Campbell for many many years, who ran numismatic magazine and did what was it, Coin World. Great guy, and really, I was talking to him about doing a page on my website of predicting what coins would have the highest return in 2 years. And, so, I mean, the question becomes, who are you dealing with? That's all. That's really what it is. And the other thing is, there's nothing wrong with having it shipped to your house. I mean, if you're not going to be getting a lot of gold, and if you are, it's not hard. I could make arrangements for you to put it into a registered vault where it's insured. I mean, those big hairy guys with shotguns and bulletproof vests are really great, but a Lloyd's of London policy is better. Okay, so have it stored and have it insured, and you have a very high chance of not having a problem at all. The only thing that really chaps me is when you get some of these counterfeit coins out of China, because what is it? The CSS, the water machines now have gotten so good that the counterfeits are almost impossible. I've got a little video out there on how to spot a counterfeit with the new water machines, but it's real difficult. I mean, they're really good. The counterfeits are really good, and they're about 50% gold, and that's a problem. But getting to it, I think taking your gold from a good house, having it shipped to you, or having it shipped and insured is going to pretty much guarantee you're going to be okay. And if it ends up missing, the insurance company is going to be sending you a check. So that's my number one recommendation, Dave, right now.
Okay. Let's go ahead and talk about what you do now. Do you consult? Do you advise? Do you have a firm? What's your current status?
Well, I'm the chairman of AU Secure, and I'm in charge of their offshore development. As you know, I have a pretty big following in the Middle East, and I'm actually making a move into Japan right now. And I'm bringing together larger FX houses that have people who have been trading in currencies and are getting a little burned out and want to move into the security of some metals. And I'm setting up metals, actually add-on websites or standalone for FX houses. I have about 5 in line right now that we're going to be handling metal for. And I've been just taking bigger houses and getting them into a way to deliver physical and or store in a registered vaulting area. And I'm doing that with AU Secure, and that has been, it worked out very well. Quasar Markets just brought me on as an advisor to them. They want to be able to deliver for them, and it's been very interesting. I was asked by FXDD, which is a large trading house, if I would handle metals for them. We're still negotiating that. Hopefully that'll come together. So I'm just sort of doing bigger houses, getting them into the physical, and then we're doing a retail page. And then on that retail page, we have something called Pete's Picks, where I pick the safest and coins or bars that have a higher probability of giving a payout over time. I'm not this overnight kind of guy, but in a couple of years, I feel that this platinum coin will have a higher value than it does now. And I try to put them out there in a way that I hope I'm right. And so far, I've been doing pretty good with it.
Well, the pandas have certainly taken a shine. I mean, they were expensive relative to another bullion coin, but geez, if you just bought, a box of pandas every year in the early 2000s and held them till now, you'd be smiling. Coming
Yeah.
back to the bigger picture, if you don't mind me interrupt you if I did, is do you see more and more pension funds and family offices and bigger money, let's say
Right.
more sophisticated money come in the metals? I sure do, but I've been biased for so long. But as the uncertainty in the markets unravel and real estate commercial looks like it's way over bought, and there's a
Overbought.
lot of
Yeah.
inventory to get rid of and all this stuff, and all things go in cycles. It seems to me like our turn is coming again, and that there will be pension plans that say, hey, Pete, we never bought metals before. We don't want to be a noob. Can you give us
Yeah.
some guidance? We've got, 800, at 80 million we want to put in the silver to test it out.
Sure.
Can you help
Sure.
us out? You see that happening?
I was just invited recently to Dubai, and I attended the family office closed meeting in Dubai. There were 300 attendees there. That was very interesting. As you know, I used to wear an ERISA hat, and I don't mind helping people. But now, what I do on the ERISA side with the big funds is I immediately bring in an attorney, because it's just too easy to make a mistake. And, I tell them what I want to do, and then they show me how to properly do it.
Mhm.
And so, but to answer your question, I'm seeing much bigger and really well-educated, good brokers who don't know anything about gold or silver. And I think that goes back to Nixon, when Nixon said, we're off the gold standard. And oh, by the way, all the MBAs that are going to be graduating, we don't want this taught in the school. We don't need it here at Harvard or Stanford, because nobody trades it. So what happened was, we have multiple generations that graduated from some of the better institutions in economics that never learned about metal. So some of them are coming to me and giving me a tap and going, would you come in and do a 3-day seminar for us? We'd love for you. Talk to our brokers, explain to them the dynamics of it, what it is, why it works and whatnot. I've been doing a few of those lately too, but the reality is that there's just a certain lack of education and a lack of sophistication in our field. People can't step into it and really get a good grasp on it. I'm doing a follow along. This is what it is. This is how you get it. This is where you store it, and that'll be out shortly on YouTube, hopefully. And I think that the real big players are starting to come around and saying, "Yeah, we're going to dip our toe a little bit in." So what you're saying is absolutely right. And sometimes they don't even realize how big their numbers are, because they don't understand that we don't print this stuff. It has to be mined, so there isn't quite as much around.
I won't name the firm, but what you said about education, that's very, very interesting and insightful as well. I was asked to do like about a 3-day lecture for
Yeah.
a retail house.
Okay.
And, of course, it's been my passion for so long. And I started
Sure.
stocks when I was 16. So, and then I got into the gold story and the resources. Anyway, it's interesting because I didn't think of it in the context that you just put it into. Even way back when, which was like 20 something years ago,
Yeah.
most of those kids didn't know why we were so excited about metals in
No.
1965 or 70. And when we went from the 64 to 65 and the silver dropped out of the coinage, and when Nixon said that he's
Right.
temporarily closing the gold window, and James
Right.
Blanchard III went in his limousine in his wheelchair and went up to the White House steps, more or less. I mean, not exactly, but in Washington, D.C., and made a speech on what happens when you go off a gold standard. And, no one
Right.
paid attention, but it was spot on.
Yeah.
And, the stuff that you and I know, we could talk all day, but I think that's interesting because I didn't look at it in that context. I looked at it in the context of just giving them some stories to talk about on the phone. But no, really, it was to excite them to what the metals market used to mean to everybody. Because
Yeah.
I lived through it like you lived through, but they
Right.
hadn't. So I'm seeing it in a different light, even though it was years ago. What you just said actually really resonated with me.
Yeah.
And, some of us gray hairs still have some stories to tell.
Oh,
And
yeah. Well, I mean, you sit down with a COO who's Harvard graduate and he's running a multi-billion-dollar firm, and you say to him when you're in school, what do they talk about cross-collateralization in metals against portfolio? And they just look at you like a deer in the headlights, because it's not their fault. All right. It was removed from the chain of economics in America. So it wasn't taught. So you have really smart individuals who are just coming around going, wow, wait a minute. I always tell people, look, back in the day when the pyramids were being built, they paid the workers for Tutankhamun's pyramid in onion bulbs, garlic bulbs, and gold. So for the last thousands of years, it has been a system of currency. So, the idea that just within the last few decades it's been taken away, it's still, when I go to the Middle East, you still see women wearing that gold, and it's not, they are not going to the bank. They want it on their arm, and so it just depends more on the nation almost than anything else.
well, it frustrates me because my friend Nick Barishev, who is now deceased, but he runs BMG Group, or started it in Canada, and he paid for an independent study by Ibbotson and Associates and had him do a portfolio analysis. And for all seasons and for all reasons, it was like 15.7. I hate the decimal thing, but roughly a 15% weighting in precious metals. His fund was gold, silver, platinum.
Okay.
Was the best portion to have during all seasons. And then this report went out and said during inflationary times, you should do it at a higher level, and deflationary times a different level. But the point being is that as a weighted portfolio, having metals in it is better than not having metals. But again, no
Right.
one knows that. He had to pay for an independent study to even get the numbers. And then you look at an independent like CPN Group out of New York, New York, Jeff Christian's group, and he did a study from 1968 on, and his number was gold only, and it was 25%. Now, specific time, 68
Yeah.
present day, and the present day was probably one of our seminars, Peter, of I don't know, about 3 or 4 years ago. But the idea
Okay.
is that you've got to have it. And no
Yeah.
one that I know of in the certified financial planning industry, which is kind of where I started. I mean, I
The
started on my
CFP area,
study,
sure.
but worked under a certified financial planner and left. I couldn't handle the BS, but regardless of my personal problem,
Right.
you don't see that taught. And I was at a lecture on a money show in Vegas, and one of their top dogs for the financial planning industry sat next, gave me his time. I gave him the elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Hey, what happens when a whale that's got 50 million under management and the stock market goes down, let's say down limit, which of course is circuit breakers now, but he
Yeah.
loses
Right.
half, and
Right.
have gold, and gold takes off. And I sent him the Ibbotson study, and he's learned he should have had a 15% exposure to gold. And if he did, his portfolio would either be up or at least break even. When are you going to do that? And he just walked away from it.
Yeah. It's interesting too. I want to go to your point, which I find fascinating. That for years, people would ask, how much should I put in my portfolio, in total in my portfolio, metals? And I was always at right around 10%, Dave.
I
And
use
I'm
that
like,
number.
yeah. But I'll tell you something. In the last 2 years, I tell people 20% now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they look at me, what? 20? I go, no, I said, that's my new number. I just feel that that's where you should be. And I think that silver, at this level, I think platinum, palladium under $1,000. I go, look, you should be putting this stuff away. And if I'm wrong, you end up with a bucket full of precious metals. Life ain't too bad, And if I'm right, unfortunately, you'll be safe. I mean, my favorite story, many years ago, I had An old Chinese gentleman was brought in by his two daughters. They helped him walk in. They would come in, and he would come in every month and buy gold from me. And didn't speak English real well. His daughters would translate. We became very good friends. He's a wonderful guy. And he would buy every month. And finally, I bought a little hot plate, and I would make tea for him, and they would come in, and we'd all have tea, and we'd talk. And I asked him, I said, why gold every month? And I said, you're not a small amount. And he goes, yeah, I know. He says, I'm going to tell you a story. He says, when I was in my 20s, I was a police officer in some Chinese district. I don't know what, I don't remember. And he said, there was a riot and they burned down the police station and it spread. And I fled for my life and I got to a boat and I had my two daughters and some clothes and my wife in tow. And we got on the boat. We took the ferry across to Hong Kong because he was on mainland and we lived there. And he said, and he traded his pistol to go across in the barge and to get across. And then he got to the other side and he said, I had in America, they call it John Browning. It's where you have the belt across and it holds your holster. And then you have the big wide belt. And inside of that, he had sewn gold sovereign coins. And they were sewn inside his belt. And he would take one coin with a knife and he would shave off a little bit of the gold and buy rice for his family and pay for rent and get clothes for them. And that belt with the gold in it kept him alive. And he said, ever since then, I always put a certain amount of anything I make goes right into gold because it saved my life. And that story really turned me around. I was like, wow. So, and that was like my first, real eye opener in gold is to, how you should have a little put away,
Right. Well, I've covered everything I want. As I said, it's a real treat. I hope I get
Oh,
to
I'm
know
so
you
glad
even
to be here.
better.
We haven't had a chance to get together over all these years. I do read your stuff. I want you to know that. And it's really been a pleasure to meet you.
Well, great. Well, we'll close it out here, Peter, and
All
we'll
right.
put it up on the website. Of course, I'll give you the link so you can spread it around to your friends. And
I will.
anything you want in the description box, let me know. We'll paste it in for you.
All right. Appreciate it, Dave. Thanks for having me.
All right. Make a great day. Talk to you soon.
All right. You too.